2004. Tin Shui Y, Hong Kong. A horrific murder occurred in Tin Shui Y, Hong Kong. When the police arrived at the scene, the woman and her twin daughters were dead on the spot, and the seriously injured man was rushed to the hospital. He was taken to the hospital and died. The police immediately found the relevant people for questioning, gradually pieced together a brutal truth. The dead woman's name is Xiao Ling. She was a girl from the Sichuan countryside. Neighbors remembered her as gentle and kind. Her husband, Li, was also a simple and honest man. They had twin daughters. They just moved to Hong Kong. They didn't have much to live on. Even the kindergarten class fee of 50 yuan. Li couldn't afford it. He had to talk to the teacher to get out of it. He told his mother to pay the fee after school. Then he went to the restaurant. He found Xiao Ling, who was working there. Xiao Ling was pretty and had a good figure. She was often ogled by unsuspecting customers. Even some kids made fun of her. Old Li watched from the corner and was not happy, but he only dared to pick a fight with Ling. Deliberately ordered high-priced dishes, but Xiao Ling is not used to him. She only ordered the cheapest noodles. Li doesn't have a job. He's an idler, fishing to pass the time. He waited for Ling to come home from work to cook. The fish he caught that day is the only thing on the table. Even though Li was already the boss at home, he didn't stop complaining. At the dinner table, Ling asked him to pay for his daughter's classes and find a decent job, but old Li is justified. He thinks he can support his family, can still support the family. He also accused Xiao Ling. Why do you want to go out to work? It's a shame for him. Old Li was furious. He picked up a daughter in his arms, threatened to take out all the money. The family of 4 will have a big meal. Let's all die together. Xu Ling is immune to his temperamental behavior. Old Li always talks about death. He always suspected. Xiao Ling has a mistress. They are an old couple with a young wife. The more time passes, the more suspicious he becomes. Late at night, Li became more and more angry. He went to the living room and dragged Ling from the sofa. He used fishing line to tie her hands behind her back. Then he started to abuse her. Old Li even from under the pillow. He even took a knife from under the pillow and threatened her. The 2 daughters were woken up, standing in the doorway, silently watched the situation inside the house. Afterwards, Xiao Ling sat downstairs in a daze. There were still blood stains on her nightgown. The bystanders passed by and expressed their concern. She could only pretend to smile, looking around at the hazy night. Ling's thoughts drifted back to the year he met Li. She was a working girl from the countryside, and Li was his guest. An old house with a bamboo mat. The 2 of them had a love affair here. Xiao Ling thought Li was his savior. If she stayed with him, she would be saved from her misery. At this time, he had made some money. After a few nights of lovemaking, he made a big promise. He ignored his wife and son in Hong Kong, followed Xu Ling back to her hometown in Sichuan. The woman is carefully testing the man in front of her. Her name is Xu Ling. She's a migrant worker from Sichuan. She met this Hong Kong man, Lao Li. The 2 of them have been engaged here for a long time. When he heard that Xiao Ling was pregnant, he decided to give her a name. He offered to meet her parents. He followed her back to her hometown in Sichuan. In the backwoods of the mountains, suddenly there was a guest from the city. The family went back and forth, making Li the guest of honor. At the dinner table, Xiao Ling wanted to save face. Old Li, the mason, she bragged about him as an engineer. He was so proud of himself. He even promised to build a house for Ling's family. Soon a 3-story house appeared in the village. This made Xiao Ling's family the talk of the village. Her parents felt honored. Li's Hong Kong son-in-law became more and more satisfied. The days in the mountains were not too long, but Li began to show his true colors. His greedy eyes. He went after Xu Ling's second sister. He followed her when she went up the mountain alone. He made a pass at her. Ling's mother noticed something was wrong, but Xiao Ling's belly was getting bigger every day. And Li did make the family. In the village, in order to hold on to the golden son-in-law's leg, the family chose to remain silent. With the family's accommodations and concessions, old Li turned into a beautiful woman. He even made a pass at his second sister at the wedding. A year later, Li's savings were at an all-time low. Xu Ling's parents saw him doing nothing all day. Their attitude had cooled off. Old Li was furious. He went straight to Xiao Ling's house. He beat the watchdog to death with a wooden stick, Seeing the blood staining the sack, the family was too scared to say anything. They couldn't stay at home any longer. Xiao Ling could only take her daughters. She followed Li to Hong Kong. I thought that even if they were not rich, I would be able to live in peace and quiet. But what Xiao Ling did not expect, this was the beginning of his nightmare. Back in Hong Kong, Li was still idle. He lived on government assistance. From time to time, he had to go to his ex-wife's son to get some pocket money. Old Li became temperamental, often in front of his daughter. He would beat and scold her without restraint. After being kicked out of her home, Xiao Ling took her 2 daughters to a shelter center. In the company of a group of sisters who share the same illness, Xiao Ling spent the last few months, the most peaceful and happy time in the past few months. Unfortunately, this life did not last. Old Li saw that Xiao Ling did not come home, called hundreds of times, but no answer. He went straight to the police station to report the case. He even acted like he missed his wife. The case was transferred to the social worker to solve. Xiao Ling was forced to meet with Li. The young mediator does not know the world. They just tried to calm her down, thinking that even if a couple has a conflict, should be tolerated for the sake of the child. Completely ignored the fear in the eyes of Xiao Ling. During the mediation, Lao Li learnt that the district councillor, he gave 500 yuan to Xiao Ling. He was furious. He suspected that there was something between them. The mediator quickly explained that the money was deducted from Li's relief fund. This made the old Li even more hideous. He pointed at Xu Ling and cursed. Xu Ling remembered that when she asked the counselor for help, the other side said that if there are special cases, you can meet the conditions for applying for separate relief. So Xiao Ling immediately reported Li for molesting her daughter. But there was no concrete evidence. Plus, Li suddenly fell to his knees. He begged for forgiveness in tears, so Ling did not know what to do. Finally, she could only follow the mediator's advice to go to Shenzhen to join her sisters who were working there. A little girl in a thin dress inadvertently pulled down the shorts of the middle-aged man in front of her. She was picked up by the man and pressed on the sofa. Neighbors outside the door saw everything, frowning tightly, showed a look of disdain and turned to run away. At this time, the girl's mother, Xiao Ling, was reporting her husband, Li, for molesting her daughter. Hearing this kind of thing, social workers do not dare to be lazy, immediately began to investigate. Unfortunately, the 2 children are too young. The younger sister is mentally handicapped. She couldn't provide effective testimony. There was not enough evidence and the case was closed. Lin could only follow the advice of the social worker. She took the children to her sisters for a temporary stay, but old Li soon came looking for him. He even took a watermelon knife from a street vendor. Downstairs at his sister's house, he forced Lin to go home by hurting himself. Lin was so scared that her legs went weak, but she didn't want to make a scene. He could only promise Li that he would go home. Let the old Li go first. Then Xiao Ling called her parents, wanted to seek some advice. I did not expect her mother's words, but the words of her mother made Xiao Ling completely cold-hearted. Xiao Ling a little desperate. He felt he probably cannot escape this miserable marriage. These days, old Li's heart is getting twisted. He walked in the food market, looking at the chopped seafood and meat on the table, the meat on the plate. He spoke with a murderous aura that sent chills down his spine. Xu Ling had no choice but to bring her daughters back to Li. Everything was quiet before the storm. As soon as they entered the house, Li showed his ferocious face. Not only did he beat Xiao Ling severely, he also smashed up the house. Xiao Ling tried to call the police, but Li grabbed her by the neck. At the last moment, only then he regained his senses and slowly let go of his hands. Xiao Ling went back to the shelter. He was determined to divorce this monster. Through friends at the shelter, Xiao Ling found a way to apply for welfare. Now they just need to get their daughter back. They can start a new life, but it was never to be expected. This time, Ray was never able to escape from the cage. She returned home and was horrified. Looking at the extra chains on the door, she thought something must have happened to her daughters. Immediately called Li, but there was no answer. Ling went to the police to report the incident, but the police cited a short period of time and family disputes. Suddenly the phone rang. Old Li said he was just took his daughters to the river to go fishing. In order to confirm the situation of the daughters, Ling had to go back alone. But what she got was the end of her life. A knife pierced her body. She watched as her 2 daughters were killed by Li. In the end, old Li's blood-stained hands called the police. He accused Ling of trying to kill him. Hang up the phone. In order to make it look real, He stabbed himself. He accidentally stabbed himself and died. This is the end of a tragic family life. The brutal and horrific murder of the family was revealed, but the murderer who caused all this, is it really just Oldley? Those bystanders who chose to remain silent to keep the peace, are not accomplices.